She never imagined that a single forgotten dollar, crumpled, damp, and nearly worthless, would rewrite the fate of her entire life. But on the coldest morning of her darkest year, struggling single mom Elena Ruiz clicked on a strange property listing no sane person would trust. A massive mountain estate priced at exactly $1. She thought it was a typo. She thought it was a scam. But the moment she stepped onto that abandoned land in the clouds, the wind shifted, whispering secrets buried for centuries, and pulling her toward a destiny worth far more than she could ever dare to dream. After that strange listing flickered across her cracked phone screen, Elena Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that fate had nudged her, quietly, firmly, like a cold hand pressed against her back. She sat on the edge of the narrow bus seat, still in her diner uniform, the fabric smelling faintly of burnt coffee and exhaustion. The world outside blurred into streaks of grey and winter light, but her mind stayed fixed on that impossible number, $1. It repeated itself like a heartbeat, steady, unbelievable, refusing to fade from her thoughts, no matter how hard she tried to dismiss it. Elena had learned not to trust miracles. Life had taught her differently, taught her through overdue rent notices, empty cupboards, tired bones that carried the weight of single motherhood with more determination than strength. She had seen hope before, usually dressed in disappointment. But something about the listing pulled at her, like the distant echo of a door she had never opened. When the bus hissed to a stop near her apartment, Mira was already waiting for her, bundled in a jacket too thin for the bitter mountain wind. Her daughter's eyes, gentle, curious, impossibly hopeful, were the only part of Elena's world that never dimmed. Mira slipped her small hand into her mother's without a word, sensing the fatigue she no longer needed explained. Inside the cramped apartment, Elena placed her tips on the table, 8 crumpled bills and a few coins, all earned one hurried order at a time. The silence of their home settled around her shoulders, heavier than the cold. She opened her phone again. There it was. Property for sale, $1. Mountain View Estate, must be sold immediately. No photos, no description, just coordinates and a name long erased by time. She didn't want to click, but her finger moved anyway. A map opened. A thin, winding road leading high into the mountains where the clouds clung low, and the air carried a wildness untouched by the town below. The place seemed forgotten by everyone except whatever force had placed this listing in front of her at the exact moment she could no longer pretend everything was fine. She whispered into the empty room, almost apologizing to the silence. It's probably nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. Later that night, long after Mira had fallen asleep, Elena sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a dim pool of light. Her fingertips tapped lightly against her mug, as though searching for courage inside the sound. The listing stayed on her screen, taunting her, inviting her, daring her. A strange current ran through her chest. A small, instinctive flicker of belief in something she couldn't name. She filled out the inquiry form. Name, email, phone. One trembling press of the submit button. Her breath caught. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then another. She was ready to close the phone and forget all of it, when the screen lit up with a single message. Approved. Deed attached. Congratulations. Elena stared at the words, not breathing. No inspection, no verification, no questions, just a deed, her name printed cleanly at the top, stamped with legal validity she could barely understand. $1 house was now hers. It felt like winning a lottery she never entered. It felt impossible. It felt terrifying. She looked toward her daughter's small, sleeping form on the sofa bed and felt the whisper of a desperate prayer rise inside her. Please let this be real. Please let this be safe. Let something finally, go right. The next morning, she borrowed an old truck from her neighbor and drove toward the mountains, Mira sitting beside her, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The road climbed higher and higher, curling through thick forests where the trees grew ancient and tall, their branches reaching over the road like guarding arms. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, until the only sound left was the steady hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Fog gathered as they reached the last stretch of road, a slow swirl of white that made the air feel heavier, colder. Mira looked out the window, her breath forming small clouds against the glass. "Mom," she murmured, "why is it so quiet up here?" Elena didn't know how to answer. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, as if the mountain itself had paused its ancient breathing just to watch them arrive. Then, as the fog thinned for a brief moment, the house emerged. A massive structure perched on the ridge, its roof lines sharp as broken crowns, its windows tall and hollow, staring out over the world like forgotten sentinels. Stone walls rose from a foundation veined with moss, and wooden beams, weathered to silver, grey, held stories far older than anything Elena had imagined. The house looked both majestic and wounded, as though abandoned by time, but still refusing to fall. Mira whispered, all softening her voice, "It looks like a castle." To Elena it looked like a test. She stepped out of the truck, the cold mountain air cutting through her jacket. The wind brushed past her legs, scattering dry leaves along the path as if guiding her toward the front steps. With every step she took, the house seemed to draw closer, heavier, more alive. At the door, her hand hovered over the handle. It was cold, colder than metal should be, as if holding the chill of centuries. Her pulse quickened. 100 worries rushed through her mind, hidden costs, collapsing floors, the fear of being foolish enough to believe in something too good to be true. But beneath the fear lived something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. She pushed the door open. A breath of stale air drifted out, thick with dust and forgotten stories. Light spilled in behind her, revealing faded wallpaper peeling like old memories and wooden floors scarred with age. The air carried a faint metallic scent, as though something deep within the house had been waiting, undisturbed, untouched, unseen. Mira stepped in after her, small footsteps echoing through the foyer. "Mom, it's huge." "It is," Elena whispered, though her voice felt swallowed by the space around her. For a moment, mother and daughter stood in the dim stillness, letting their eyes adjust, letting their hearts steady. The house felt abandoned but not empty. Something lingered here, something neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present, like the last breath of a long, forgotten dream. Then Elena heard it, a faint metallic echo from somewhere deep within the house. Soft, sharp, almost like a distant drop of metal striking stone. She froze. The sound came again, not wind, not pipes, something else, something waiting. She took one small, cautious step forward, knowing without understanding that whatever she found next would change everything. And as the cold air settled around her shoulders, Elena Ruiz felt the first quiet turning of fate, subtle, irreversible, already pulling her deeper into the mountain's hidden story. The metallic echo faded into the stillness, yet its impression lingered in Elena's chest like a pulse she couldn't calm. She moved deeper into the foyer, her footsteps slow, steady, carrying the weight of someone stepping into a future she hadn't chosen but couldn't walk away from. Dust floated through narrow beams of light spilling from cracked window panes, drifting like suspended memories awakened by her arrival. Every breath she took carried the taste of age and time, like the house exhaled after decades of silence. Mira hovered close behind her, fingers lightly hooked in the back of Elena's jacket, her small presence grounding, fragile, and brave all at once. Her voice was a whisper, barely lifting above the quiet. "Mom, does it feel different in here?" Elena didn't answer at first. She wanted to believe it was just nerves, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. But the truth was clearer with every second she stood inside the house. Something in these walls had stirred the moment they crossed the threshold, something that felt less like danger and more like awakening. She brushed her fingertips along the railing of a sweeping staircase that curled up toward the shadows above. The wood felt worn but sturdy, carved with delicate patterns softened by time. Whoever had built this place had cared for detail, shaping it with skill and intention. But the neglect was unmistakable. Cobwebs shimmered between banisters, dust softened every corner. The house felt like a forgotten kingdom at the edge of the world. A draft moved through the hall, carrying a faint scent, cool, metallic, ancient. It brushed against her ankles and drifted toward a narrow hallway to her left. Elena followed it, drawn not by logic but by instinct, like the house itself guided her deeper. The hallway opened into a long room lined with tall windows whose frames held stories carved into their wood. Twisting vines, stars, mountains, symbols she didn't recognize. Light poured in gently, illuminating the air in gold and gray. A few pieces of furniture remained. An overturned chair, a cracked table, remnants of a life that once threaded through these walls. Mira walked ahead, her boots crunching softly over a layer of brittle leaves that had blown in from broken panes. She reached the end of the room and pointed upward. "Mom, look." The ceiling above was painted with an elaborate mural of the mountain range outside, peaks wrapped in mist, valleys glowing in soft dawn light. In the center, a sunburst motif radiated outward, painted in fading gold that still shimmered faintly when the light touched it just right. Elena stared, her chest tightening with an unfamiliar ache. This was not the work of a simple homeowner. It was art, history, a story someone had once poured themselves into. But beauty and abandonment rarely existed alone. At the far end of the room, near a toppled cabinet, lay something that didn't match the age of the house. A thin, folded envelope, its paper brown slightly, edges crisp but not ancient. Someone had placed it there intentionally. She picked it up, brushing dust from the surface. No name, no address, just a blank face hiding a message. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in quick, urgent strokes. "Whoever finds this, be careful where you step. This house is older than it looks." Her heart stuttered. Older than it looks. Older than the deed, the records, the architecture. Elena folded the paper slowly, her fingers cold. She didn't want Mira to see the fear tightening behind her ribs, so she slipped the note into her jacket pocket with a steady motion. As she turned, she found her daughter watching her, not scared, just observant in that quiet, intuitive way children often are. "Are we staying here tonight?" Mira asked softly. Elena hesitated. The logical answer was no. The safe answer was no, but standing there, beneath fading sunbursts and ancient symbols, she felt something shift. An understanding, a pull, a quiet promise that her life was meant to change here. Not in fear, but in purpose. "Not tonight," Elena finally said, "but soon." Mira nodded, satisfied for now, and walked toward the windows where light warmed the chilled air. Elena followed, letting her eyes drift across the view outside, endless mountains stretching in every direction, rolling in deep blues and muted greens, disappearing into clouds that drifted like slow, moving tides. Down below, the town felt small, distant, as if sealed in yesterday. Here, everything felt like tomorrow. As they explored further, the house revealed more of its story. Carved wooden door frames with symbols etched delicately along the edges, floorboards that groaned under their weight as though testing their presence, walls textured with decades, old layers of paint and secrets. Elena did not know what to make of it all, but she knew one truth: no ordinary family had lived here. Whoever built this place had woven meaning into every corner. Near the back of the house, they discovered a narrow staircase descending into the lower level. Elena paused at the top, gripping the railing. The metallic scent was stronger here. The air felt colder, stiller. Mira pressed close to her side. "Is it safe?" Mira whispered. Elena swallowed. "We'll check it later, together." She closed the door gently, as if sealing something ancient behind it for just one more day. They wandered next into a small room near the kitchen, a space touched by more warmth than the others. A fireplace stood against one wall, soot, blackened and dormant. A cracked photograph leaned against the mantel. Elena lifted it carefully. In the picture, a family stood in front of the same mountain house, smiling, proud, unaware of the years that would swallow their laughter. But something about the photo felt wrong. The clothes were modern enough, the picture quality looked recent, but behind the family, the carvings on the doorway were different, cleaner, sharper, untouched by time. As though the house had changed since then. A shiver crept beneath Elena's skin. She set the photo down slowly, unwilling to admit the strange unease crawling through her thoughts. Maybe neglect had done more damage than she realized. Maybe time had twisted memories in the walls. Maybe she was just tired, overwhelmed by too much hope and too little reality. They walked toward the front of the house again, Mira exploring the corners with a soft sense of wonder. Elena tried to imagine what this place could become: a home, a refuge, a chance at life with fewer cracks and more light. She tried to see past the dust and decay, past the uncertainty and questions. But as they reached the foyer, the metallic echo sounded again, clearer this time, coming from somewhere beneath them. Mira's small hand found her mother's instantly. "Mom, someone's down there." Elena's breath caught. "No," she said softly, "not someone." She wasn't sure how she knew, but she felt it, deep in the quiet, deep in the floor, deep in the bones of the house. Not someone. Something. She eased Mira behind her and took a cautious step toward the sound. The floorboards felt colder under her feet, as though the vibrations of the echo still lingered. She lowered herself slowly to one knee, placing her palm against the wooden planks. A faint tremor answered. Not dangerous, not threatening, just present, as if the house had a heartbeat. She rose slowly, her mind spinning, her lungs drawing air that felt heavier by the moment. Nothing made sense. Not the sudden approval, not the strange envelope, not the shifting quiet resting in the walls like a forgotten breath. But as she looked around the vast, shadowed foyer, Elena Ruiz knew this with startling clarity. She had not bought a house. She had stepped into a story, and the story had just begun to wake. With a final glance toward the hollow silence beyond the stairway, Elena took Mira's hand, guiding her back toward the door. They would return tomorrow, with tools, with courage, with questions they didn't yet know how to ask. As they stepped outside into the cold mountain air, Elena looked back at the towering structure resting against the sky. The wind moved through the trees with a low, ancient hum, as though the mountain itself whispered something only she was meant to hear. Whatever waited inside, whatever had whispered through metal and dust, it was part of her fate now, and as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, Elena sensed it clearly. The story was only beginning. By the time Elena and Mira returned to the mountain house the next morning, the wind had shifted, carrying with it a quiet that felt almost deliberate, like the mountain had been waiting for them to come back. The sun hung low behind the clouds, casting pale ribbons of light that slid across the stone walls and made the windows shimmer faintly, as though the house recognized them now. Elena stepped out of the truck with a slow breath, feeling the weight of yesterday settle into something steadier, something almost like acceptance. Mira ran ahead a few steps, her boots crunching over frost-tipped grass. "Mom, it looks brighter today," she said, shielding her eyes from the thin mountain glare. Elena looked up at the towering structure, its edges softened by the morning mist. Brighter wasn't the word she would have chosen, but there was a subtle shift, an easing of the tension she'd felt the day before, as if the house had exhaled overnight and opened itself a little more to their presence. The silence felt warmer, less guarded, yet still filled with the same ancient stillness that made her heart beat faster. When they stepped inside, the foyer greeted them with the lingering scent of old wood and dust, but beneath it, something fresher. A faint trace of pine from the forest outside, carried through cracks in the glass. Light seeped through the windows in soft, scattered beams, revealing more of the details she hadn't noticed before. The delicate etchings on the banisters, the subtle patterns hidden beneath layers of dust, the faint shimmer of something metallic embedded in the grain of the walls. Mira twirled slowly in the center of the room, her small figure lifting dust into the air like drifting snow. "It feels different," she murmured. Elena nodded. "It does." She wasn't sure why the shift felt so personal, why the house's silence felt less like emptiness and more like awareness. But she pushed the thought aside and focused on what needed to be done. They were here to explore, to understand what they had walked into, and maybe, if she dared to hope, begin shaping this abandoned place into something that resembled a home. They moved carefully from room to room. Sunlight poured into the long parlor with the mural, covered ceiling, revealing details Elena had missed, faint carvings along the baseboards that resembled mountain ridges, and symbols etched into the window frames that she still couldn't identify. Every corner, every shadow, held fragments of a story waiting to speak. Mira drifted toward a dusty bookshelf near the far wall. Its shelves sagged from age, but most of the books remained intact, their leather spines cracked but legible. She pulled one down, blowing onto the cover until a cloud of dust burst into the air like a sigh. "Mom, look at this," she said, opening the book with careful hands. Elena crossed the room and peered over her daughter's shoulder. The pages were filled with sketches, mountain outlines, strange symbols repeating across margins, drawings of carved stones and circular patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. Whoever had lived here hadn't just admired the mountains. They had studied them, understood them, maybe even protected something hidden within them. Elena slowly turned the next page. A sketched map appeared, crude but intentional. A path led from the house toward a part of the mountain she didn't recognize, marked with a symbol she had seen carved into the window frames, a circle, surrounded by radiating lines, like a sun or an eye. Something cold moved through her chest. She closed the book gently, not wanting Mira to feel her unease. "We'll look at this later," she said softly. They moved into the kitchen next. Rusted pots hung from hooks, and a cracked ceramic bowl sat on the counter, filled with dried leaves as if left mid-task decades ago. The scent of metal still lingered here, faint but unmistakable, like the echo she'd heard in the foyer the day before. The cold draft moved through the kitchen in short, subtle breaths, whispering from the lower levels of the house. Elena kept Mira close as they explored the back corridor. A line of framed sketches hung crookedly along the wall, drawings of the house, the surrounding ridge, and what appeared to be ancient structures built into the mountainside. The ink had faded, but the shapes remained clear enough. Tall stone pillars, circular chambers, intricate carvings resembling the ones she'd found throughout the house. The deeper they went, the stronger the metallic scent became. When they reached the narrow staircase leading downward, Mira's steps slowed. The wooden railing felt colder than the rest of the house, carrying that same trembling sensation Elena had felt when she pressed her hand against the foyer floor. "Mom," Mira murmured, "it feels like yesterday, like something's still down there." Elena placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll go carefully." She led the way down, one slow step at a time. The air grew colder with each descent, the shadows thickening along the walls like layers of forgotten breath. The staircase ended at a small landing with a heavy wooden door set into the stone foundation. Its hinges were rusted, but the lock had been broken long ago, leaving the door slightly ajar. A faint, rhythmic tapping drifted from the darkness beyond, soft, distant, metallic. Mira pressed closer to Elena's side, her voice a fragile whisper. "Is someone here?" Elena held her breath. The tapping stopped. The silence grew heavier, as if something deep within the house had paused to listen to them. She reached for the edge of the door and pushed it open just enough for light to spill through the crack. The room beyond was lined with old crates, broken shelves, and tools coated in thick dust. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing lived, but the metallic scent filled the air, stronger now, threading through the room like a hidden presence. Elena stepped inside cautiously, Mira gripping her sleeve. She examined the floor, old stone, uneven, marked with scratches that didn't match simple wear. Some marks looked like drag lines, others like chisel cuts. And beneath the dust lay faint patterns, carved into the floor in shapes she couldn't decipher. Mira tugged on her hand, pointing toward a wooden workbench. "Mom, what's that?" On the bench sat a journal, smaller than the one upstairs, bound in dark leather. Elena opened it, finding pages filled with hurried handwriting, notes, sketches, timelines of discoveries made beneath the house. The entries grew more frantic as the pages turned. "There are chambers below this place, older than the foundation. The symbols, they match the mountain carvings. Something is still active down here. I hear it at night." Elena's pulse quickened. The final entry read, "Do not open the lower floor, not alone." A cold shiver crawled down her spine. She closed the journal carefully, tucking it under her arm. "We're going back upstairs," she said quietly, guiding Mira toward the door. As they climbed the staircase again, the air warmed slightly, the shadows thinning as morning light reached for them. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the house had been listening, awakening, remembering, waiting. When they stepped into the main hallway once more, Mira looked up at her mother with wide, searching eyes. "Mom, do you think this house is trying to tell us something?" Elena didn't answer, because the truth pressed against her chest like a whisper she wasn't ready to speak. The house wasn't just telling them something. It was opening its story one breath at a time, and deep within its heart. Something ancient was waiting to be found, back in the main hall. The light had shifted, stretching long beams across the floorboards, as if the sun were slowly reaching into the house, searching the rooms they had just walked through. Elena set the small leather journal on the nearest table, its weight still lingering across her palms like a warning she couldn't ignore. The air inside felt unsettled now, not dangerous, but aware of their presence, like the walls were absorbing every sound, every breath, every quiet decision she made. Mira wandered toward the tall stairway leading to the upper floor. Her hand skimmed the dust-coated railing with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Can we look upstairs?" she asked softly. Elena hesitated. The downstairs had already revealed enough to unsettle her, but she couldn't keep Mira frozen in fear, and a house this large held too many unanswered questions to ignore. She nodded. "Stay close." They ascended the staircase slowly, each step creaking beneath their weight like a whispering chorus. The higher they climbed, the thicker the stillness became. A hallway stretched out before them, long and lined with closed doors that seemed to guard whatever stories the house refused to release easily. Elena tried the first door. It opened into a bedroom covered in blankets of dust. A tall wardrobe leaned against one wall, its mirror cracked into a spiderweb of fractures that distorted their reflections. A faded quilt lay on the bed, untouched for years, as if someone had left it in a hurry and never returned. The air carried a faint floral scent beneath the dust, like a memory of someone who once lived here. Mira stepped closer to the mirror, studying the broken pieces with solemn curiosity. "It feels sad," she whispered. Elena gently guided her away. "Come on. Let's check the next room." The second door led to what must have once been a study. Papers were scattered across the floor, some yellowed with age, others curled from exposure. A heavy desk stood in the corner, drawers half open as though someone had been searching for something important. Elena knelt down and sifted through a few pages. Most were sketches, mountain outlines, stone artifacts, fragments of symbols. But one sheet held her attention, a drawing of the house, outlined in careful detail, but beneath it, a staircase, hidden, leading down. Her breath tightened. Mira pointed at the sketch. "Is that place under the floor?" Elena swallowed. "Maybe, or something deeper." Before she could study it further, a soft gust of wind slipped through the room. The curtains lifted slightly, revealing a narrow side window cracked open just enough to let in a thin blade of cold air. Outside, the mountain clouds swirled like slow, earning storms, shifting the light in quiet pulses. The third door down the hall opened with a groan into what had once been a child's room. A small wooden rocking horse sat in the corner, its paint chipped. A bookshelf leaned on its side. A few toys lay scattered across the floor like remnants of a life abruptly paused. Elena felt a pang deep in her chest, an ache she couldn't place, something that didn't belong to her but lingered in the air like a forgotten lullaby. Mira walked toward the rocking horse, touching its worn mane. "Do you think a kid lived here, too?" Elena nodded. "Maybe." She didn't want to imagine what had happened to them, why they had left so suddenly, why the house had remained silent and untouched for so long. The final door at the end of the hallway felt different. The wood was darker, heavier, almost polished compared to the others. A thin symbol was carved into the top, circle, lines radiating outward, the same symbol she had seen in the journal. A quiet shiver slid down her spine. She turned the knob slowly. The room inside was brighter than the rest, the windows wide and unbroken. Sunlight poured in openly, revealing shelves lined with journals, notebooks, and strange artifacts arranged with deliberate care. Stone pieces engraved with spirals, metal fragments shaped into unfamiliar designs, wooden tablets carved with precise lines. Everything looked catalogued, sorted, studied. This had been someone's research room. Elena stepped inside with careful reverence, her eyes drifting over the objects. She didn't understand what she was seeing, but she felt the significance lingering in the air, like the whole room held its breath around knowledge too old to ignore. Mira wandered toward a low table where a thick leather-bound journal rested larger than the others. She touched it lightly. "Mom, can I open it?" Elena knelt beside her. Together, they lifted the cover slowly. Inside were pages filled with detailed sketches of underground structures, tunnels, chambers carved in stone, walls lined with symbols that glowed faintly in the drawings. Notes described something ancient, something buried beneath the mountain long before the house existed. Words repeated through the margins: preserve, protect, hidden, unrecorded, older than the settlers, older than the mountain maps. One drawing stood out above the rest, a chamber shaped like an oval, sealed by a heavy stone door covered in intricate carvings. Below it, the note read, "First chamber located, deeper passages suspected, requires extreme caution." Elena felt the hairs on her arms rise. This wasn't a random house. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a $1 property out of luck or neglect. Someone had built this place above something ancient, something they studied, guarded, and possibly feared. Mira looked up at her mother with wide, steady eyes. "Mom, are we supposed to find whatever they found?" Elena opened her mouth to answer, but a sudden sound cut through the silence, a hollow, distant crack, followed by a thin vibration beneath their feet, the same metallic echo from before, this time deeper, clearer, almost calling from below. Mira's hand tightened around Elena's. Elena slowly closed the journal, her breath unsteady. She didn't know what waited beneath the floors, or what story had been buried beneath this house. But the more she explored, the more certain she became. This mountain had been hiding secrets long before the house existed. And now, those secrets had begun to stir. She took Mira's hand and led her back toward the hallway, the sound fading slowly behind them. As they stepped into the foyer once more, Elena paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the place where she first heard the metallic whisper. Tomorrow, she would search deeper. Tomorrow, she would open what the previous owners had feared, because the house wasn't done revealing its truth. And as Elena stood there, listening to the quiet rise and fall of the mountain wind, she knew the next step would lead her underground, into the first hidden chamber, into the heart of mystery waiting for her in the dark. By the next morning, the mountain air felt sharper, colder, as if it carried the weight of something waiting beneath the house, something that had been restless ever since Elena first stepped over the threshold. She and Mira returned with tools, flashlights, and layers of stubborn determination. The sunlight skimmed the top of the ridge, tracing pale fire across the roof, but the shadows near the foundation felt heavier than the day before, pooling like secrets gathering strength. Inside, the foyer welcomed them with that same expectant stillness, the air shifting in slow currents as if aware of what Elena had come to do. She knelt beside the floorboard where the metallic echo had first answered her footsteps, running her hand along the uneven grain. It looked ordinary, but the wood felt heavier under her palm, thicker, colder, almost like it was hiding breath just beneath its surface. Mira stood close, hugging her arms. "It's under there," she whispered. "I can feel it." Elena nodded, though the quiet knot in her stomach tightened. She took a screwdriver and slid it beneath the boards. The wood resisted at first, groaning softly, the tired sound of something long sealed. But then, with a slow exhale, the plank lifted. Dust billowed upward, shimmering in slender light. Beneath the floor lay a dark square cut perfectly into the foundation. A wooden hatch, old, hidden, waiting. Elena grasped the metal ring embedded in its center. It was icy against her fingers, colder than the air around them. She lifted gently, and the hatch rose with a low, ancient sigh, revealing a narrow opening and a steep wooden ladder descending into darkness. A breath of cold air drifted upward, carrying the unmistakable scent of stone, damp earth, and something metallic older than tools, older than time. Mira leaned forward. "There's a room." Elena steadied herself. "Stay behind me, okay? One step at a time." She started down the ladder, the wood creaking under her weight. Each rung felt older than the one before, smoothed by hands she would never know. The dim light from above faded with every step until only her flashlight carved a thin path through the stone throat of the shaft. When her boots reached the bottom, she exhaled sharply. The chamber was narrow, carved directly into the mountain rock, its walls rough but deliberate as if shaped with ancient tools. Dust coated everything, thick and untouched for decades, maybe centuries. The air felt tight, dense, clinging to her skin like forgotten breath. Mira climbed down, landing lightly beside her. She clung to Elena's sleeve, her eyes wide as they scanned the shadows. The beam of the flashlight drifted across small clay tablets stacked along a ledge, each etched with symbols she didn't recognize, lines, circles, intricate patterns that resembled the motifs carved upstairs but far older. Near them lay rusted tools, chisels, worn brushes, metal rods whose uses she couldn't imagine. A heavy stone slab formed a table in the center, still holding fragments of stone broken long ago, like remnants of an unfinished study. "Mom," Mira whispered, "this place feels sad." Elena understood. The chamber didn't feel abandoned, it felt interrupted, as if someone had been working down here until something forced them to stop. She swept the light across the walls, more carvings, deeper, older than the ones upstairs, lines forming spirals that looped into each other, symbols arranged in a language she could almost feel more than understand. Her pulse quickened. "What is all this?" Mira asked. Elena whispered, "I don't know." But the chamber knew. Its silence pressed in on them, not suffocating, just close. Like the air was thick with the memory of hands that once shaped this place. She traced a symbol with her fingertip. The groove felt precise, purposeful. Everything down here had been built with careful intent. Her flashlight drifted lower and caught on something at the far end of the chamber. A wall, not like the others, smooth, flat, a door, a stone door sealed tightly, carved with spirals and sun, symbols that radiated outward in perfect symmetry. Dust clung to every curve, but beneath it all, the stone glimmered faintly, as if the carvings had once held light. Mira stepped closer, her voice barely a breath. "Mom, that looks like the door from the picture." Elena's heart pounded. The journal, the sketches. This door had been documented by someone who didn't open it. Someone who feared the lower levels, someone who warned her in writing. She approached slowly, each step echoing lightly across the stone. The air grew colder the nearer she came, tightening around her lungs. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the surface. The stone felt different, denser, smoother, almost warm beneath the dust. Mira tugged her sleeve. "Don't open it yet, please." Elena nodded, her breath unsteady. "I won't." But the door wasn't passive. It felt like it was listening, waiting, holding back a story older than the house, older than any map drawn of this mountain. She shone the light across its edges. No hinges, no visible lock. Just a solid slab embedded into the mountain, sealed by pressure or by something more intricate. Her voice trembled softly. "Who built this?" Mira looked up at her, and though she didn't answer, her silence held an unspoken truth. Whoever carved this chamber had done so long before the house existed, before the families who lived here, before the town below was ever formed. Elena crouched near the base of the door. The dust was thick, untouched, confirming what she already sensed. "No one's opened this in a very long time." She whispered. The quiet deepened. Something cold brushed the back of her neck, a tiny current of air escaping from somewhere behind the stone, faint but present, a whisper of movement in a place where nothing should have moved. Mira shivered. "Mom, something's behind there." Elena swallowed hard. "I know." She stood slowly, her flashlight trembling in her hand, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming weight of discovery. She didn't understand the symbols, the age, the purpose, but she could feel the importance in her bones. This wasn't just a hidden room. It wasn't a curiosity. It was a threshold, a barrier between the world she knew and a world buried in the mountain's ancient heart. She turned toward Mira. "We're going back up," she said gently. "We need to understand more before we open anything down here." Mira nodded, pressing closer as they stepped toward the ladder. But before Elena lifted her foot to the first rung, something echoed behind them, soft, distant, metallic. One single sound, like a drop of metal hitting stone, from behind the sealed door. Elena froze, Mira's breath caught. The chamber fell into a silence so deep it felt alive. Then the sound faded, swallowed by the heavy stillness, but its presence lingered, trembling faintly through Elena's chest. Whatever lived behind that door had heard them, and for the first time since finding the house, Elena understood. The mountain wasn't just hiding history. It was guarding something that wasn't meant to be forgotten and wasn't meant to be found easily. They climbed the ladder in silence, rising out of the cold breath of the chamber and into the uncertain light of the house above them, each step echoing the truth she could no longer ignore. This was only the beginning. When Alina closed the hatch behind them, the sound echoed through the foyer with a low, hollow thud. Final, heavy, unmistakable. It felt like sealing away a secret that wasn't ready to breathe open air. The boards settled with a soft groan, and for a moment the quiet of the house wrapped around them again, thick and knowing, as if listening through the walls. Mira stood close, her small fingers wrapped around Alina's hand, her eyes fixed on the floor as though the stone door below pulsed faintly through the wood. She didn't speak, and neither did Alina. Words felt too fragile to touch the truth they had just discovered. Only when a draft drifted through the foyer, a cold breath rising from the foundation, did Alina finally find her voice. "We'll figure out what's down there," she whispered, more to herself than to Mira. "But we won't rush it." Mira nodded slowly, her gaze lifting toward the staircase that spiraled upward into the dim second floor. "Do you think they left the house because of that door?" Alina swallowed the unease tightening in her throat. Maybe, or maybe they were looking for something and never found it. But she knew it was more than that. The journals, the sketches, the warnings, they weren't from curious homeowners. They were left by people who had understood the weight of what lay under their feet. People who feared what might happen if the door was opened without knowledge, or without permission. The silence in the house shifted again, settling deeper, like the walls were waiting to see what she would do next. She took a deep breath and led Mira toward the parlor. Morning light seeped through tall windows, revealing dust dancing in quiet spirals. The mural on the ceiling glowed faintly, the painted sunburst almost alive in the soft light. Alina stepped closer, studying the details she hadn't noticed before. Golden lines swirling outward from the center, almost identical to the carvings on the stone door below. The connection pressed against her mind, subtle and undeniable. This house hadn't been built by coincidence. It had been placed here with intention, aligned, positioned, watching something beneath the mountain. Mira moved to the bookshelf and pulled another old journal free, flipping to a page filled with sketches of symbols, circles, spirals, lines intersecting in patterns that resembled constellations. She traced one with her finger. "Mom, these are on the door too." Alina knelt beside her. "They are. But why?" Mira asked. "Why would someone carve the same things everywhere?" Alina didn't have the answer, but as she stared at the symbols, a soft warmth pulsed beneath her ribs, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something like recognition, as though the shapes were speaking in a language she didn't yet understand but felt in her bones. She closed the journal gently. "We need to learn everything we can." They moved through the house again, searching each room with sharper eyes. In the old study upstairs, Alina found a drawer she'd overlooked the day before. Inside lay a rolled sheet of parchment tied with faded cord. When she unwrapped it, the paper crackled softly, revealing a hand-drawn blueprint of the house. But this wasn't an ordinary blueprint. A large circular shape marked the center beneath the foundation. Lines extended outward like rays of light, and near the bottom edge of the paper, a single handwritten note survived the fading ink. "First chamber discovered. Second chamber deeper." Alina's pulse quickened. The stone door downstairs was only the beginning. Another chamber existed, deeper, hidden even further beneath the mountain. She felt her breath falter as she stared at the blueprint. Someone had known, someone had mapped it, someone had tried to reach it. Mira studied the parchment. "There's more under the house." "Yes," Alina whispered, "more than we realized." A low creak sounded from the hallway, soft but distinct. Alina rose slowly, her pulse climbing. Mira instinctively moved behind her, clutching the edge of her jacket. The house wasn't shifting from wind or settling wood. This sound was deliberate. Weight against a floorboard. Not loud, not threatening, just present. Elena stepped into the hallway. Nothing moved, but the air felt thicker, denser, like someone, or something, had just been there. She turned back to Mira, forcing a steady smile. It's an old house, it makes noises. But inside she wasn't convinced. They made their way downstairs again, the blueprint still in Elena's hand. The foyer felt colder now, the draft creeping from the floor as though the hidden chamber below was breathing through the cracks. Elena placed the parchment gently on the dusty table beside the first journal they found. Her eyes drifted to the hatch beneath the floorboards. Beneath her feet, the ancient chamber waited, silent, sealed, patient. But the faint tremor she had felt earlier hummed now like a distant heartbeat, not constant, not loud, but alive. Mira tugged her sleeve. "Mom, I had a dream last night." Elena knelt beside her. "Tell me." Mira's eyes flicked toward the floor. "I saw gold, not like coins, like shapes sitting in the dark, like statues, and someone was watching them, but I couldn't see who." Elena felt her breath catch. Gold, shapes, watching, the ancient artifacts upstairs. The carvings, the sealed door, the blueprint, the chambers. Pieces clicked into place gently, quietly, forming a truth she wasn't ready to face, but could no longer avoid. Mira looked up at her again, voice trembling. "Mom, I think something's waiting for you down there. Not bad, just waiting." Elena gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling the small, steady heartbeat against her chest. Mira wasn't afraid. Not in the way children fear monsters or shadows. Her voice held something different, a calm, a knowing, a strange intuitive understanding that sent a shiver through Elena's spine. When they stood again, Elena looked at the hatch with new eyes. She wasn't just dealing with a forgotten structure beneath the mountain. She wasn't just uncovering someone else's research. She wasn't just walking into curiosity. She was stepping into fate, into a destiny hidden beneath layers of stone and silence. She took one final look at the blueprint. Tomorrow she would return to the chamber. Tomorrow she would face the sealed stone door. Tomorrow she would discover what the mountain had guarded for centuries. And as the afternoon light dimmed across the foyer, the house seemed to exhale once more. Quiet, solemn, certain. The deeper story waited below, and Elena Ruiz was already walking its path. The next morning rose pale and cold, a thin wash of silver light spilling over the mountain ridge, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the house that guarded its secrets. Elena walked toward the front steps with a quiet heaviness in her chest, each breath crystallizing in the sharp air. Last night's discoveries clung to her, blueprints of deeper chambers, symbols repeating like ancient echoes, and Mira's dream of golden figures watching from the dark. Today, she wasn't climbing back down the ladder out of curiosity. Today, she was going to learn what waited behind that sealed stone door. When she opened the front door, the foyer greeted her with a familiar hush, but the silence felt different now, denser, almost expectant. Mira followed her in, her eyes drifting immediately toward the floorboards covering the hatch. Something in her expression softened into acceptance, as though the house had become part of their story, not an intruder in it. "Elena," she whispered, "it's okay. The house isn't mad. It's awake. Awake." The word pressed against Elena's heart like a quiet truth she didn't know how to hold. She gathered their flashlights, the journals, and the old blueprint, spreading them out across the dusty table. Every line, every symbol, every sketched chamber pointed toward the same place. The stone door beneath the house that someone had drawn with shaking hands, marking it with warnings instead of instructions. "Do not open alone. First chamber discovered. Second chamber deeper, older than the settlers, older than the maps." Elena traced one of the symbols carved into the parchment. a circle with 8 radiating lines. She had seen it on the ceilings, the windows, the wooden beams, and most importantly, carved deeply into the stone door itself. Whoever lived here before had tried to understand it. Whoever built this house had known its importance. Whoever sealed the chamber had reasons that went beyond fear. Elena didn't know whether she was ready, but she knew she couldn't turn away now. She lifted the floorboard, opened the hatch, and descended with Mira close behind. The cold air wrapped around them again, older, heavier, pulling them into the narrow shaft like the breath of something buried in time. When they reached the bottom, the chamber greeted them with the same stillness as yesterday, but something had shifted. The dust in the air felt disturbed, as though the echoes of their footsteps had lingered overnight. The stone slab table, the clay tablets, the rusted tools, all seemed to stand at attention, waiting. The sealed door stood at the far end, the spiraled carvings faintly illuminated by their lights. Elena approached it slowly, every footstep carrying the weight of a decision she knew couldn't be undone. As she neared, the cold deepened, seeping into her skin. The stone seemed to draw the warmth from her fingers even before she touched it. Mira stayed beside her, small but steady, her breath quiet in the darkness. Elena rested her hand on the surface. The stone pulsed faintly beneath her palm. It wasn't her imagination. It wasn't settling rock. Something behind the door was reacting to them. She whispered, "It's listening." The spiral carved into the center seemed almost alive under the beam of her flashlight, shadows pooling into the grooves like ink returning to etched words. She felt a tremor, small, subtle, but unmistakable, vibrating through the stone. Elena, Mira stepped closer, her voice barely more than breath. "It feels sad, sad." The same word Mira used yesterday in the chamber above. Elena's heart tightened. She pressed gently on the stone. Nothing moved, no hinge gave way, no mechanism shifted. The door wasn't made to swing open. It was made to hold something back, sealed not by locks but by design. Elena stepped back, scanning the walls for clues. And there, just to the right of the door, she noticed a faint crack running vertically along the edge. Not damage, not age. A seam, thin, precise, almost invisible beneath the centuries of dust. The door wasn't one solid piece. It was fitted, engineered, meant to open under specific conditions. She crouched, brushing dust away with her sleeve. Symbols lined the seam, small ones she hadn't noticed before. They matched the tones of the mural above and the windows upstairs, forming a repeating pattern like an ancient instruction she couldn't yet decipher. Mira knelt beside her. "Mom, what if these are the way to open it?" Elena breathed slowly. "Maybe, but we don't know how." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of responsibility settling into her bones. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a structure below a forgotten house. It was a remnant of something sacred, a piece of history untouched not because it was forgotten, but because it was protected. She turned back to the stone table, scanning the clay tablets, the broken fragments. One tablet had been brushed clean more recently, its symbols carved deeper, sharper. Elena lifted it carefully. Lines intersected in star-like patterns surrounded by spirals and sunbursts, the same symbols. The same patterns, over and over. Someone had been translating these, studying them, trying to understand the chamber, just like she was now. Mira leaned closer. "Mom, I think the people who lived here before were scared, but also proud." Elena blinked. Proud of what? Mira traced a spiral on the tablet, of whatever's behind that door. The words settled in the chamber like quiet prophecy. Elena studied the symbols again, her flashlight catching the lines in a new way. She began to see connections, not meanings but alignments. patterns that repeated from ceiling to floor, from tablet to door. It was as if the symbols created a map, or a message, or a key. She moved back toward the sealed door, lifting the light against the center. The carvings glowed faintly under the beam, revealing grooves worn smooth by time. She pressed her hand once more to the spiral, and this time the stone thrummed softly beneath her skin, a pulse, slow. Deep, alive, Mira gasped quietly, "It's breathing." Elena's breath caught. She stepped back, wiping cold sweat from her palm. The chamber felt smaller now, the pressure of the mountain above them settling into the air like a warning, or an invitation. Something behind the door was real, something ancient, something waiting, but it wasn't brute force that would open it. It wasn't courage or tools or reckless curiosity. It needed understanding, respect. Knowledge of whatever history lay etched into the symbols all around them. Elena took Mira's hand. "We're going back up. We need to learn more before we try anything." Mira nodded, though her gaze lingered on the door, as if listening for another faint pulse. As they climbed the ladder, the chamber felt heavier behind them, the air vibrating with a strange, quiet awareness, almost like disappointment, or patience. When Elena pulled the hatch closed again, sealing the hidden chamber under the floor, she felt the same low thud echo through the house, soft, final, not angry, but expectant. The door had heard them, and it knew they would return, and as Elena exhaled into the stillness, she felt the truth settle through her. The door was never meant to open easily, but it was meant to open, and she was already becoming the one who would find the way. Back in the upper rooms of the house, the silence felt different, no longer empty, but filled with a quiet weight that settled into the corners like a memory slowly returning. Elena set the journals and the blueprint on the long parlor table, spreading them out beneath the soft spill of afternoon light. Dust drifted in thin spirals, catching the gold shimmer of the painted sunburst above, as if the ceiling itself were watching her unravel the past. Mira stayed close, her small footsteps echoing lightly against the hardwood. She moved with the same cautious curiosity she'd had since they arrived, but something in her had shifted, an awareness, a calmness, as if the house whispered to her in ways it didn't to Elena. She glanced toward the staircase that led back down to the chamber. "It's not mad at us," she said quietly, rubbing her thumb across the spine of an old journal. "The house just doesn't want us to open the door the wrong way." Elena paused, absorbing those words. "How do you know?" Mira shrugged gently. "It just feels like that." Elena rested her hands on the blueprint, her fingertips trailing the inked lines. The circular chamber beneath the house, the spiraling symbols, the markings that mimicked constellations, it all formed a shape, a pattern, a message she wasn't trained to read, but she could feel its meaning, like pressure building behind a wall of time. She traced the outline of the sealed door, the one guarding the first chamber. The hand, sketched symbols around it matched the carvings throughout the house, the windows, the ceiling mural, the stonework upstairs. Whoever built this place wasn't hiding the truth. They were surrounding the truth, protecting it with repetition, anchoring it across every surface like a spell. A soft wind drifted through a cracked window pane, brushing across the blueprint with a faint rustle. Elena lifted her eyes. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly, the ridge bathed in fading light. There was a timelessness to it, a sense that the house had always been a sentinel perched between sky and stone, overlooking something sacred buried deep within the earth. Her heartbeat steadied as she turned to another journal. This one was older, its pages yellowed and delicate, but its ink still dark. She opened to the middle, sketches of carved stones, notes scribbled in rushed handwriting. Attempts at translation. One phrase was repeated again and again, written in different variations. The chamber of dawn, dawn chamber, first chamber of the sun. Elena felt a chill climb her spine. Sun symbols, radiating lines, circles carved into stone. This was no coincidence. Mira climbed onto the couch beside her, resting her chin on Elena's shoulder to look at the journal. "Mom, does it mean sunrise, maybe?" Elena murmured. "Or something new, something that starts everything." Mira nodded slowly, as if that answer matched something she already understood. Elena flipped to the next page. This one was rougher, drawings made in shaky hands, like the person who created them was frightened, exhausted, or out of time. The sketches showed the stone door, and beneath it, faint outlines of another chamber much deeper, marked with an even larger sun carved into its wall, and beneath the drawing, a single written warning: "If the first door opens, the deeper one will answer." Elena closed the journal with trembling fingers. The deeper chamber, the second door, the ancient pulse she felt beneath her hand. This wasn't a simple archaeological site. It wasn't an accidental discovery. It was a layered secret, built, sealed, and guarded by generations. Mira slipped her small hand into hers. "Mom, what if they were scared of what would happen? But what if it's not bad? What if it's something important?" Elena exhaled softly. "We don't know yet." But inside, she felt the truth curling around her ribs like vines of cold fire. Whatever lay beneath the mountain wasn't meant to be lost. It had been waiting for someone who approached not with greed or fear, but with intention. And somehow, she had become the one crossing that threshold. As the light dimmed, Elena moved through the upper floor again, her footsteps slow, deliberate. Each room felt alive with a whisper of memory. The cracked mirror in the bedroom caught her reflection in fragments, almost like the house was showing her pieces of a story she hadn't yet assembled. The rocking horse in the child's room remained still, a silent echo of the life once lived here. The study, littered with papers and fading ink, felt like an unfinished conversation spanning decades. When she returned to the hall, Mira looked up with a soft, steady certainty. "You're going back tomorrow." Elena didn't answer aloud, but her silence carried agreement. She had to understand the symbols. She had to study the journals. She had to trace every carved line of the house to find the key that would unlock the first chamber safely. Yet even as she prepared herself, something else tugged at her senses. Not fear, not urgency, but presence. As evening light slid through the windows, stretching long shadows across the parlor floor, Elena felt a shift beneath the boards. Not movement, not sound, just a gentle change in the air pressure, like the mountain exhaled through its stone veins. She stopped, listened, held her breath. Nothing. But the echo of awareness remained. The quiet pulse she first felt on the stone door, now humming through the floorboards like a distant heartbeat, awakening slowly, patiently, inevitably. Mira whispered, "Mom, it knows you're coming." The words settled into the silence with a weight that felt ancient, knowing, unshakable. Elena closed the journals, gathered the blueprint, and gently placed them on the table. She turned to the darkening foyer, the shadows gathering like folded wings. Tomorrow she would return to the chamber. Tomorrow she would face the sealed stone door again. Tomorrow she would uncover what the mountain had been guarding. But tonight the house held its breath and waited, because the moment that door opened everything would change. The following morning broke with a strange stillness, as if the entire mountain had paused its breathing to watch the house awaken. Frost clung to the windows in delicate fractal veins, tracing patterns that looked almost like the carved symbols below. When Elena stepped outside to breathe in the cold air, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Iron tracks on the gravel road leading up the ridge. Not recent, but not old either. They didn't belong to her truck. Unease rippled through her chest, quiet but sharp. This mountain had been forgotten for decades, abandoned long before her arrival. No one should have been up here. No one should have known there was something worth seeking. Mira stood in the doorway behind her, rubbing her arms against the cold. Her voice drifted softly through the fog. "Mom, someone else came here." Elena didn't want to admit it aloud, but the truth pulsed in her veins like a warning. She guided Mira back inside, closing the door gently, as though the house could shield them from whoever had left those tracks. The foyer felt heavier than yesterday, as though listening for danger outside its walls. Elena gathered the journals again, spreading them across the parlor table. She tried to focus on the symbols, the carved lines, the repeated motifs that seemed to spiral into an ancient language. But her mind kept drifting back to the tire marks. Someone had been here, watching, searching, and if they knew about the house, they might know about the chamber beneath it. Mira climbed onto the couch, holding one of the smaller journals open in her lap. Her voice was soft, thoughtful. "Do you think the other people want what's behind the door?" Elena's pulse hitched. "I don't know," but she suspected, because the artifacts, the carvings, the ancient chambers. Nothing about this place was ordinary, and nothing valuable remained forgotten forever. As she studied one of the tablets, the sunlight dimmed suddenly, as if a cloud had passed in front of the sun. But when Elena looked up, the sky outside remained perfectly clear. A shadow had brushed across the window, not the shadow of a tree, not the silhouette of a bird, a figure, fleeting, human, watching. Elena froze, breath caught at the base of her throat. She stepped quietly toward the window, pressing 2 fingers against the glass. The frost melted beneath the warmth of her touch, revealing a clear view of the ridge beyond. No one was there, just snow, forest and silence, but the certainty thrummed inside her. She had been watched. Mira's voice wavered slightly. "Mom, there's someone outside, isn't there?" Elena forced a calm breath. Maybe it was just, but she couldn't lie, not to Mira, not after everything the mountain had already shown them. She moved through the house, checking each window quietly, her footsteps deliberate and soft. The house creaked in slow, ancient murmurs, as though stretching to listen with her. She scanned the forest edge, the winding road, the slope leading downward. Nothing, yet the unease clung to her skin, cold and insistent. When she reached the back hall, she remembered the study upstairs, the locked drawer, the photo of the family who once lived here, the journals documenting discoveries no one should have known existed. Whoever had been here before must have told someone, or someone must have seen enough to follow. Elena returned to the parlor and sat beside Mira. The girl leaned against her shoulder, sensing the tension radiating from her mother's breath. "Elena," Mira whispered, "I heard something last night." Elena's heart tightened. "What did you hear?" Mira pointed toward the floor. The hatch, the chamber, the sealed stone door sleeping beneath the boards. "A whisper?" Elena's skin prickled. From the chamber, Mira nodded slowly. It sounded scared. The words struck Elena like cold wind. Not angry, not dangerous. Scared the chamber, the door, whatever lay behind it. Something wasn't just hidden down there. It was guarded, protected, maybe even hunted. And if an outsider was watching the house now, then the ancient secrets buried beneath the mountain were no longer theirs alone. Elena opened the largest journal again, flipping to a page she hadn't examined closely before. A hand-drawn map of the region sprawled across it. Mountain trails, caves, cliffs. But one mark stood out. A red X, not far from the ridge. Beside it, a scribbled note. Last sighting. Approaching the site. Elena felt her breath stall. Someone had been searching for this place long before she arrived. Mira held her hand tighter. "Mom, what if they're coming back?" Before Elena could answer, a sound drifted from outside. A twig snapping. Close, deliberate. She rose slowly, moving toward the window with silent, measured steps. The snow outside glowed pale against the trees. Wind murmured softly through distant branches. But the area near the path leading to the house, a shadow moved, not large, not fast, just enough to see. Enough to confirm what her instincts already screamed. Someone was out there, watching the house, watching them. The mountain was no longer empty. The secrets beneath the floor were no longer safe. And, as Elena stepped away from the window, heart pounding with cold clarity, she realized the ancient mystery wasn't the only danger approaching. The living had found the mountain, and they were coming closer. Because whatever waited behind that sealed stone door, someone else wanted it too. Elena backed away from the window with a quiet, deliberate calm that didn't match the tremor rising inside her. The house seemed to sense her fear, its old beams tightening with soft creaks, its silence settling into something protective, almost alert. Mira stayed close to her side, her eyes wide and searching, following every movement with an instinct more ancient than the mountain itself. "Elena," she whispered, "do you think they know about the chamber?" The question struck like a cold spark in Elena's chest. She didn't have to speak the truth for Mira to feel it. Yes, someone knew. Someone had been circling this place long before they arrived. Someone who had been waiting for the mountain house to reveal its secret. She walked through the hall with slow, measured footsteps, checking each room the way a mother checks for storms, not hoping to find danger, but preparing for its certainty. Every window offered the same view: snow, trees, light. But beneath that quiet, something restless stirred. Elena returned to the parlor table, staring down at the journals. Inked warnings swirled across the pages in frantic handwriting. Strangers came asking. They know about the artifacts. Hide everything. Do not let them near the chamber. She felt the weight of those words settle into her bones like a burden she had never asked for, but one she now carried simply because she opened the door of this house. A faint tap echoed from outside. 1, 2, then silence. Elena's heart began a low, steady pounding. She moved toward the kitchen, where the windows faced the slope of the forest. Snow drifted quietly through the trees, but halfway down the ridge, footprints cut through the unbroken white fresh, pointed sharply toward the house. Not animal prints, not wandering hikers, human, deliberate, tracking. She inhaled slowly, steadying her breath as she stepped back. The house felt warmer suddenly, as if something deep within its wooden ribs tightened in solidarity, drawing her closer to its hidden heart. Mira stepped into the kitchen doorway. "They're coming, aren't they?" Elena knelt to cup her daughter's face gently. "We're safe right now. We just have to be careful." But even as the words left her lips, she felt the truth thrum under the floorboards. There were things in this house she still didn't understand. Things older, deeper, wiser. The carvings, the patterns, the way the chamber pulsed faintly at their touch. They weren't coincidences. This house had been built to protect something, and now it was up to her to protect it from those who watched from the shadows. As the wind whispered through the eaves, she heard the faintest shift of gravel outside, like a boot turning slowly, cautiously. Elena felt her muscles tighten. She slid closer to the window, peering out through the narrow gap between the frost and the curtain. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, coated in thick winter gear, face hidden beneath a hood, watching the house, not approaching, studying. Elena stepped away before the figure could notice her. Her breath trembled, but her resolve tightened. She hurried back to the parlor, closing the curtains with careful hands. Mira hugged herself. "Mom, do they want what's behind the door? I think they want everything." Elena whispered. She gathered the journals again, flipping through pages with rising urgency. There had to be something, some explanation for what these people sought, some record of what the original researchers feared. In one journal, she found a page marked with a pressed leaf, brittle from time. The writing beneath it struck like cold fire, artifacts discovered in first chamber, possibly pre-civilization, cultural value immeasurable, potentially priceless. A chill swept through her that was enough to attract anyone, enough to fuel greed, obsession, rivalry, enough to bring strangers up a forgotten mountain road. But further down the page, the ink darkened, the handwriting jagged as if each stroke fought panic. But the danger is not in the artifacts themselves. It's in what they guard. Elena's breath hitched. The stranger outside, the tracks, the shadow in the forest, whoever they were, they didn't want history, they wanted power, myth, legacy, the deeper chamber the journal warned about, the one even the original researchers feared. And Elena, without meaning to, had become the barrier standing between them and the mountain's secret. A sudden thud echoed from outside, loud, sharp, unmistakable. Mira flinched, pressing close to Elena's arm. Elena placed a steady hand on her daughter's back, guiding her gently toward the inner hallway. She whispered, "Stay with me, no matter what." They moved deeper into the house, away from the windows, away from the watching eyes outside. The hallway stretched long and narrow, dust motes, swirling in beams of fading daylight. Elena paused, listening to the quiet, her instincts sharpening like a wire pulled tight. The house seemed to press in around them, its silence turning protective, the air thickening with something ancient and watchful. Elena didn't know if it was the house or the mountain or something beneath the floorboards, but she felt unmistakably that they were not alone in this struggle. Not truly. Mira looked up at her with a soft, steady voice. "The house likes us, it'll help." Elena brushed a trembling hand down her daughter's hair. "I hope you're right." But as she turned back toward the parlor, another shape flickered past the side window. Closer this time, unmistakably human. Watching, waiting, planning. The threat wasn't coming. It was already here. And as the last light of day slipped behind the jagged peaks, Elena Ruiz felt it like a quiet warning inside her chest. This was no longer just about ancient carvings or hidden chambers. This was about people willing to do anything to take what wasn't theirs. The darkness outside thickened, and the mountain house, once silent, forgotten, hidden, felt suddenly like the first battleground in a story far bigger than Elena ever imagined. Night was falling, and eyes in the dark were no longer watching from afar. They were closing in. Night settled over the mountain with a heaviness Elena had never felt before. Thick, unmoving, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The house, once eerily silent, now felt tense beneath the weight of unseen eyes watching from the tree line. Every gust of wind carried a whisper of danger, brushing cold fingers across the walls as if urging her to stay alert. But the greatest truth waiting for Elena wasn't outside. It was buried beneath the floorboards, buried in the journals, buried in a past older than maps could remember. After locking every door and pulling every curtain tight, Elena sat at the parlor table with Mira curled beside her. One lantern glowed between them, casting soft amber light across the journals. The pages fluttered slightly in the draft that slipped beneath the doors, an old house breathing anxiously in the dark. "Elena," Mira murmured, tracing her finger over an old ink sketch, "do you think the people who lived here before knew someone was watching them too?" Elena swallowed. "I think they knew more than they wrote down." She turned to a journal she hadn't examined closely before, the thick leather, bound one with the most wear, its edges softened by decades of handling. When she opened it, the first page bore a single name, Dr. Arturo Salvatierra, anthropologist, historian, caretaker of the ridge. Elena froze. The handwriting, sharp, elegant, confident, matched the notes scattered throughout the house. Dr. Salvatierra hadn't been an ordinary researcher. He had been the keeper of this mountain, She flipped the page. The entry that followed was quiet, almost reverent. The site predates all known settlements. These chambers were not built for worship. They were built to protect. Protect what? Protect who? Elena traced the words slowly, feeling the weight behind them. Further down the page, the notes grew more frantic. The first chamber is only the threshold. They carved warning symbols. They did not carve fear, only reverence. If opened without understanding, the balance will break. Elena felt her pulse tighten. The deeper chamber, the sealed stone door, the trembling beneath the floor. Mira leaned in closer, her breath warm on Elena's arm. Mom, Dr. Salvatierra didn't sound scared, just careful. Elena nodded, careful because he understood the truth. She turned another page. On this one, Dr. Salvatierra had sketched an old map of the ridge. Mountain paths intertwined with symbols she recognized from the stone door. At the base of the mountain, near a valley she knew from town stories, a faded mark showed a tiny settlement long abandoned. Beneath the map, a note whispered across the page. The landslide destroyed the surface village, but their true legacy was buried deep, kept in the mountain itself. Elena felt a shiver run through her. A landslide. She remembered local rumors, whispers about an ancient village lost to the earth centuries ago. Mira whispered, Mom, the people who lived here before, they didn't disappear. They moved under the mountain. Elena looked down at her daughter with a tremor in her chest. Maybe they didn't move. Maybe someone moved their legacy to keep it from being destroyed. She flipped to another entry, one that made her breath stop. Artifacts belong to the Dawn Keepers. Their guardianship passed down through generations. Only blood of intention may unseal the chamber. Blood of intention, not lineage, not heritage, purpose. Mira touched Elena's hand. Mom, that's you. The words struck like a soft thunder inside her. Not destiny in a fantastical sense, but responsibility. One born from compassion, caution, and the willingness to protect rather than take. Another entry followed. If outsiders come, they come for the wrong reason. Greed listens for echoes. Greed digs where it does not belong. Outside, a faint crunch of snow sounded, soft but heavy, a footstep. Slow, measuring, Elena blew out the lantern instantly, plunging the room into darkness. She moved Mira silently behind her, both of them breathing in shallow, quiet pulses. Through the pale glow of moonlight slipping past the curtains, Elena saw a silhouette pass one window. Then another, not animals, not harmless wanderers, people closing in. Mira clutched her mother's arm, trembling. Mom, they're here for the chambers. Elena pressed a finger to her daughter's lips, guiding her toward the hallway with slow, steady movements. Her voice was a whisper barely audible beneath the creaking floorboards. We're not letting them inside. But as she backed away from the windows, her foot brushed something. The largest journal she dropped in her haste. Its pages fell open to a final entry near the end, not frantic, not fearful, almost resigned. If the house is ever found again, let the keeper remember, the mountain chooses who guards its truth. Elena froze. The mountain chooses. The words hummed through her like a quiet awakening. She looked down at Mira. The child's wide, steady eyes reflected certainty. Certainty she didn't understand but felt. Elena. Mira whispered. The mountain chose you because you care, not because you want anything. A quiet breath escaped Elena. Outside, footsteps circled the house again. Closer, slower, deliberate. But inside, another truth surfaced like dawn rising behind the mountains. The deeper mystery wasn't meant for those who hunted it. It was meant for those who protected it. The house wasn't just shelter. It was a guardian, and Elena Ruiz, whether she wanted it or not, was becoming its heir. The truth beneath generations was no longer buried. It had risen into her hands, and the danger waiting outside the house was only the beginning. The footsteps outside slowed to a predatory crawl. circling the house in tightening loops. Elena guided Mira deeper into the hallway, keeping her steps light, her breath steady, her heartbeat hammering quietly beneath her ribs. The house felt alive around them, every beam, every floorboard, every shadow bracing itself as though it too sensed the threat pressing in from the trees. A soft tap brushed against the back window, a deliberate knock. Not forceful, not impatient, a warning. Elena pressed her palm against Mira's back, guiding her down behind the old cabinet near the study door. The lantern remained unlit, their world wrapped in the muted glow of moonlight seeping through narrow cracks in the curtains. Outside, voices murmured, low, hushed, carried by the wind. She couldn't make out the words, just the intent, sharp, focused, searching. Elena crouched beside Mira, whispering so quietly it was barely a breath. Stay close, no noises, no movement. Mira nodded, her eyes reflecting the dim light like small, determined embers. The fear in her face didn't shake her resolve, it sharpened it. A faint creak came from the back porch. Someone had stepped onto it. A second creak, a slow shift of weight, then silence so thick it pressed against Elena's ears. They were checking entrances, testing windows, feeling for weak points. Elena's gaze darted toward the floorboards covering the hatch. A cold wave rippled through her. If they forced their way inside, if they found the entrance to the chamber, they would take everything, the artifacts, the carvings, the ancient truth buried in stone. And they wouldn't care who they harmed in the process. Elena stood silently, moving through the hallway with a slow, deliberate grace. Each step was chosen with intention, avoiding the boards she knew creaked the loudest. She stopped at the kitchen, her breath hitching as she pressed her eye against the crack of the curtain. A man stood only a few feet away, dark coat, hood pulled low, face shadowed, just a hint of pale skin beneath the winter fabric. He held a flashlight off, using the moonlight instead, scanning the walls with a quiet familiarity that didn't belong to a stranger. He wasn't just searching the property. He knew what he was looking for. Elena stepped back from the window, stomach tightening. They've been here before. She whispered to herself, not just watching, studying, hunting. Her gaze darted back to the journals on the table. One page had mentioned outsiders, people who demanded access, who questioned Dr. Salvatierra, who believed ancient artifacts should be extracted, sold, displayed. Greed listens for echoes. Greed digs where it does not belong. She swallowed the tight knot forming in her throat. Whoever these people were, they weren't amateur treasure seekers. They were professionals, organized, determined. Another voice drifted through the walls, clearer this time. Lights off, they're inside. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Mira pressed closer to her mother, whispering trembling words. "Mom, they know we're here.